my screen.
Okay.
Let me know if you can see it.
Yep, I can see it. Okay, so I think we can go on to the next slide. Like I said, today, thank you, welcome. We're going to be discussing updates to our PEP process. And I went over a little bit already, I jumped ahead, but we sent the PowerPoint, so you have that to reference. We're also going to review the 2 new forms. There's been some minor revisions to the PNP that kind of capture the process that we're talking about. So we'll review that at the end. And there's a data and communication guide that also might be helpful to reference. So I will be, we'll be referencing that as well. Sorry about that. Next slide, Marianne. Okay, so what is a PEP? A PEP is a short-term voluntary placement that's agreed upon by the family, whether that be the parents or the guardians who we are servicing, as well as social worker and supervisor, as well as manager. In Sacramento County, I don't know if everybody is aware, but Sacramento County is one of the few counties, if not the only, and Chris, I'm not sure if you know that offhand, but if not the only, who really supports PEPs because of the value that we see for the short-term placement to try and ensure safety of the child. However, we also are aware that there's some potential unintended consequences. And so, for example, when we utilize a PEP, that does open a foster care placement episode for that child. And if the child remains in a PEP for longer than 8 days, then returns home, and then comes back within a year of returning home, it's actually considered a reentry into foster care. It's something we're aware of, something we wanted to point out. But we feel like the benefits still outweigh that unintended consequence. Questions on that?
I have a quick question, Christy.
Yeah.
When you say that I'm assuming this is for SIP purposes and kind of tracking for the state and things.
Yes.
When a child comes back into foster care, does that mean that they have to be into foster care pursuant to like juvenile court? Could it be another PEP? Or a voluntary placement, or any of those 3 things?
Ooh, Marianne, do you know? I would venture to say that it's any of those things that opens up a new foster care placement. So a PEP, that's a great question, but I guess I want to double check that because I haven't actually.
That's accurate, Christy.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, anytime a child comes into any kind of custody, I believe that counts as a placement episode.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just wanted to make sure out there I had agreement there. So thank you, Brian and Marianne. And thank you for the question, Chris. That's a good.
Hey, this is Tara. I just have a real quick question on that too. So if after a year, a child comes back in and they go into a PEP and it's not for 8 days, is it still considered a placement? Let's say it's for 4 days, or does it have to be that full 8 days to be considered that?
I know that entering the PEP opens the foster care, but I'm not sure, and Chris or anybody else, Brian, I'm not sure if you all know the answer. That's a great question, Tara. And if anybody on the call knows the answer to that, feel free to share. Otherwise, I can look into that, Tara, and get back to you.
Thanks.
I think it does count. I want to say again that anytime, even if it's just for a couple days, it still counts as a placement episode. That's
my understanding.
Yeah. So go ahead, Jason.
I can confirm that I'm on the self-improvement plan S1 committee where we try to reduce re-entry within the year. So yes, if it comes back within the year, it's considered an additional placement and reentry.
So the determining factor though for the initial PEP, it needs to be longer than 8 days, but that criteria is not in place for if the child were to be back in placement then.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions before we move on? All right, Marianne. Okay, we're gonna have some fun. Hopefully you all have access to answer. We're gonna do a couple questions. Our first question, just answer as it applies to you. Have you utilized a PEP before? Yes, no, or you're not sure. Our votes are coming in.
This is Alicia. I feel like it should have some game show music.
I know, huh? Next time. Especially with Jason's Jeopardy in the background.
Right? There you go.
We'll have more people. I'll give maybe 20 more seconds for those of you that haven't voted yet. We don't have quite everybody yet, but a good number.
It's important to vote. Just ask Pennsylvania.
That's true. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, we'll end the polling and share our results. So about 75, 76% of people have used them. 22% have not, and a couple are not sure. And that's cool to see. I'm hoping that this training will help to provide more familiarity and understanding for those of you that haven't, and for those of you that have. Hopefully this isn't too terribly different than what you're used to doing. We just have a process to kind of mirror what our current practice is. Okay, stop sharing. And then we'll do one more question. So for those of you, if you don't know, take a guess. If you're wanting to utilize a PEP, requires a staffing with your supervisor and manager, true or false? Votes are coming in. Do another 10 seconds. Okay, looks like most of the voting stopped. I'm going to end the poll and our results. All right, so most people are aware already that yes, the PEPs do require staffing with supervisors and managers. And we'll talk a little bit more about that today. Okay. So let's just have a little bit of discussion before we move on. For those of you that have used a PEP, what are some reasons that you have found the need to utilize a PEP in the past? What's an example of when one made sense?
When people are gonna, this is Shelly from ER. When someone's gonna do IS, like after a pause talks birth of their baby, sometimes I'll do a PEPS placement while the parent gets their services in place.
Okay.
Hi, this is Blanca. I've utilized the PEPs when maybe a parent is participating in services and they test positive and they don't have any family members or friends to help care for the child while they get stabilized.
Yeah, yeah, no informal arrangements were available. Thank you. Any other examples anyone wants to share? Okay, well, those are both great examples. And I'm sure there's many other instances. Thank you, Blanca and Shelley, for sharing those. Okay, Marianne, we can move forward. All right. So like we just discussed in the second poll question, we are, our current practice already requires staffing with supervisor and manager for approval prior to utilizing a PEP. And prior to us developing this new practice, we were finding during case reviews that there was not always clear documentation as to the reason for PEPs or whether or not the situation actually met all the criteria for a PEP. Or whether supervisor or program managers had actually approved the PEP. So we're really hoping that this new process will just help align with what our current expectations are, as well as help provide us some easier access to data for how many PEPs we're actually utilizing and what the outcomes of those are. We don't really have a way to consistently track that easily. And so this new process will also help us have access to the data regarding our PEP usage as well. Next slide. Okay, so what are we doing now? So we are going to be reviewing a couple new tools and just reviewing the procedure on how to use the new tools to track and document our PEP process and usage. And we are anticipating that this new process will help to ensure that they're used appropriately as outlined in our policy and procedure. The form will give us a way to document that the staffing occurred, what the situation was for the family, and why the PEP was needed. It will also hopefully help to ensure that we are not exceeding the time limitations of PEPs, and that we are really monitoring and hopefully able to monitor those easier before we get to the end of a PEP. And again, like I said, just for the tracking of data to look at our practice and the outcomes. Next slide. So this is just a quick review. This is not new. Our current policy includes that when we use a PEP, all these 5 criteria need to be met. So I'm not going to read it word for word, but we just need to make sure that there's been an assessment with SDM, that there's a safety threat, and that cannot be immediately mitigated by leaving the child in the home. We need to have assessed the parent guardian has the protective capacities, and that we anticipate we'd be able to return home within a short amount of time. The parents willing and able to participate and maintain contact with their social worker and their child. That we've, like Blanca was saying, that we've exhausted informal arrangements. There's nobody in the family system or friends that we could utilize. And that there's a high likelihood that child and parent can reunify within 14 days. And then just a little note, if there are more than one parent or legal guardians, that both need to agree to the PEP. Next slide, Mary.
I have a quick question.
Oh, sure, Gina.
So if you had the parents sign up PEPs, but then you were able to find family, how do you remove the PEPs paperwork?
I believe, but I'm happy for for others on this call that may be a little bit more experienced. I believe that you would just staff with your supervisor and get approval from the program manager to end the PEP. And in that staffing, you would explain the situation and what's changed and how it's safe for the child to go to that other informal placement and what the safety planning would be around that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's correct. And also make sure you, in the placement episode, so complete your 1173 to make sure that payment stops flowing.
Thank you. Yes, that is a great point to add. Yes, thank you, Marianne.
So if they never, let's say if the baby never left the hospital and went to the foster agency, do I still need to do 1173 to make sure there's no payment? Or
If there was never a CRDS, the child removal data sheet, if that was never filled out, indicating that the child was actually in placement, then no, you wouldn't need the 1173. It's only if the placement episode had actually been initiated.
okay, I'll look and see if the child worker did that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the question. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. So our process then, so when a social worker identifies the need or the possible need for a PEP, or when there's an anticipation that we might need to extend a PEP, because PEPs are always approved initially never for more than 14 days. So if we get to the point to where you're anticipating you may need to extend the PEP, a formal staffing is held with the social worker and supervisor, and also with the program manager to obtain approval for either the initial PEP or any extensions. And so we have two new forms now that will be used in that process. And they're both in CWS. It's a CS 232 and 233. Those are the initiation or the initial approval form, and then the extension form. And we'll review those again a little bit later. At the conclusion of each staffing, we're then tracking data from those forms, whether or not the PEP was approved. So if the PEP was approved or if it was denied, we're still gathering the data from those forms. Those forms are being sent to regional points of contact. We have assistance in each region from Amanda in the north, Patricia in South Central, and Lavinia in the east. And then Tammy Nava is also helping just to provide coverage and backup. So those are your regional points of contact, and they'll be ensuring that the data from each of the staffings is tracked in our tracking log. When PEPs are approved after those staffings, they will also be responsible for sending calendar reminders through Outlook to the assigned social worker, supervisor, and program manager with reminders for check-in dates as we're getting closer to the 14-day mark, if the child has not gone home yet, and to make sure that we either have a plan for the child to go back home or a reminder that we need to have another staffing to see if we should be extending the PEP. There's also going to be calendar reminders for you to easily see when the current expiration dates are. And then if a PEP is denied, the supervisor and program manager really should be communicating with the social worker to determine what the next steps are to ensure child safety if for some reason we're not agreeing to move forward with a PEP. And then Chris, I'm going to kick it over to you, just a special note about Indian children.
Sure.
Christy, I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead, Tom.
Oh, Chris, Christy, we have a question.
Yes.
Can you clarify the difference between placing with a relative and a PEPS?
So I will give my clarification and then Marianne, feel free to jump in. But when you are able to locate a relative, you can actually do an informal arrangement. It does not open up a foster placement. That's something that would be agreed upon by the family. The family is identifying that relative. You've made contact with that relative. You've assessed that a safety plan can be put in place. And so that relative also does not get funding through foster care. It's just considered an informal short-term arrangement between the family. Versus a PEP really opens up. So that's when we couldn't find anyone. The family has nobody that they've identified or able to identify that could provide some short-term care for the child. That's when we look at our PEPs, which is more often than not a foster care placement or with a resource family. Occasionally, if the child's needs are a bit more in high acuity needs, that might be with an STRTP. The majority is hopefully with a resource family. Does that answer the question? Yes, okay.
Yes, we got a thumbs up, yes.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Okay, Chris?
Yes, thank you. So my special note about Indian children, I want to add that in any case where there is reason to know under WIC section 224.2D, that is a case that needs to ultimately go to court to have the court approve of a voluntary placement of an Indian child. This process is still in development, and there recently have been new rules of court and new forms that have been developed by Judicial Council to work through this process. My office has met with Judge Messiwala in Department 133, and she is available to support these Indian child cases. So to save you the heartache of trying to figure out all of these legal terms and navigate this, I want to make sure that you know that Tina Roberts and Katie Covert are great resources for you. And in cases where you have information that the child may be an Indian child and you want to just do a double check and say, hey, is this something that needs to go to court? You can talk with them about whether there is reason to know at that time, and then make sure that you appropriately staff the case, because that might be a case that actually needs to go to the juvenile court. The new rule of court says that the court has to set a voluntary proceeding for an Indian child within 72 hours, meaning that if the department petitions the court will set a hearing within 72 hours. So for those cases that you think a PEP is appropriate, then you have the opportunity to get to court very quick to bring that in front of the court.
Thank you. Any questions on a pause? Any questions regarding that before we move on? Okay. And Marianne touched upon this, but just as a reminder, once you staff for a PEP, if the PEP is approved, there is placement paperwork. There's a packet of paperwork that needs to be filled out. That also includes the CRDS that Marianne referenced to start the foster care funding for the placement, along with a couple other forms. And so there's a packet that that you all can reference and ensure that the paperwork is appropriately completed.
Christy, I want to answer really quickly a question that came in from Beverly in the chat. And she asked, does a report have to be generated for the court at this voluntary proceeding? And the answer is no. There is a one-page form that needs, or I think it's 2 pages, that needs to be filled out before court. And so Katie, Tina, Nikki, we can all kind of talk with you about this and help you all fill out the form, because it's all very new. The form was just adopted in September. And I don't think any county other than LA County has a policy on how to deal with this voluntary proceeding stuff. So this will all be new for everybody.
Thank you. Okay, next slide, Marianne. Okay, so the next couple slides are just in chart or table format. There's also, this is in our, there's a resource guide attached to the PMP and Policy Tech, and we'll review that at the end, but this is also referenceable there. And this just gives a quick snapshot of kind of who is responsible for what. So this slide is referencing for program managers. At the conclusion of every PEP staffing, ensure that the appropriate form, whichever one is being utilized and staffed, is filled out correctly. And then within 1 working day, email that form to the regional point of contact so that that information can be tracked. And then just have ongoing communication with supervisors and the POCs regarding the status of any children that are in PEP placements, just to ensure that we are monitoring how things are going, when and if it's safe for that child to return home, and or do we need to find an alternative arrangement. There's also a couple data points that are not included on either of those forms. It's also really helpful, and we would like to track that. Those include the date that the PEP ends. So anytime a PEP is closed, that information needs to be tracked, and maybe we can go on to the next slide because I think I'm kind of going into, yeah. So any type of PEP is ended. Supervisors hopefully have received that information from their social workers and can email their PM if you haven't already verbally told them in the staffing, but also send them an email along with your POC for the date that that PEP closed, as well as what happened at closure. So did the child go back home? Did we initiate court or voluntary placement? And then if any PCFTs were held, the dates that those were held. And those can be in separate emails. So there might be more than likely a PCFT that was held prior to the PEP closing. When the PCFT is held, you can go ahead and email that information to the POC. You don't need to wait until you have all of those data pieces. We just want to make sure that we, by the end of closure for that PEP, have all of those for the POC to track. And then the next slide, Marianne. And then what are the POCs doing? So when they receive the different forms and when they receive the email with the data that we just went over, they'll be adding that to a tracking log. They'll be sending the Outlook reminders for the check-in dates and the expiration dates. And they'll also be sending weekly updates to their respective PMs with just the status of all the open PEPs in their region. Questions on any of that? Okay, we can move on to the next slide then. Okay, so Marianne, you're going to help to open these. Like we said, the forms are located in CWS. Like with any forms where there are multiple children, open it under the youngest child. The youngest child information will auto-populate on the form, and then information for siblings will be typed in as applicable. The request for approval forms, Marianne will open that up in a minute, but just to touch base on that really quick before we look at those, this form really is, as best we can anticipate it, this form is designed to be completed in partnership between social workers and supervisors. Oftentimes, social workers are in the field and you all have determined that there's imminent need to find an alternative placement for that child. So it may be that you are calling your supervisor on the phone and your supervisor is going into CWS to help complete this form as you all are staffing about the need for a PEP. However, there might also be times where the social worker has access to CWS and fills out that form as well. This is a new process. So again, we designed this as we anticipate it working best, but obviously I would, as we implement this and with feedback, if we figure out that there's a different way or a more appropriate way to fill out this form, we can definitely adapt our process. And then our extension forms, those would be when social workers assess that we thought the child was going to be able to go home before 14 days. That's no longer, for various reasons, no longer looking like that's going to be possible. We need to have an extension. The social worker is responsible for completing that form, sending it to their supervisor, and having a discussion, a staffing about that, along with including the PM. So Marianne, you want to show those forms and we can review them real quick. I'm not going to go line by line on the forms, but just kind of want to reference them, give a little familiarity. Also, I want to point out that they are enabled for electronic signatures. We're hoping, especially given our current climate and with so many people working remotely, we wanted to make it as easy as possible for signatures to be obtained quickly without having to run back to the office and sign hard copies. We still want copies of these forms for the file. We still want them printed out, but everybody can sign them electronically.
Can you see that first form?
Can you make it a little bit bigger, Marianne?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Okay, so mother's name up at the top, and like I said, the child's name, if it's a sibling, that youngest child's information is going to be auto-populated. And then if there are siblings, you can enter in the rest. And if you can go down, Marianne, the next sections really just mirror what the criteria are for PEP that are in the PMP. So all those boxes need to be checked in order for us to meet the criteria to approve a PEP. If you want to continue going down, Marianne, the majority of these boxes ask for, you'll see, as evidenced by. So that's where the detail of the situation of the family. How do we know that we've exhausted all informal arrangements? What is our assessment? What information leads us to believe that the current situation can be rectified in 14 days? So those are fields in CWS that can just be typed into. Hopefully you won't have narrative cut off. They should be hopefully built so that enough space is there for you to type in the information that is applicable. And then the next section, right there. The check boxes, select the circumstances that necessitated the PEP and are likely to be rectified. That is, you can select as many as apply. So it may not just be one of these. It might be a couple of these that are the current situation for the family. So you can just go ahead and check. There's also an other box. So feel free to use that if there's something that's not listed that really is pertinent and a primary reason of why we're utilizing the PEP. Go ahead and type that in. And then go down just a quick, up a little bit. I'm gonna just touch base on that question before. So what actions have been taken? So this is just a prompt. Have we utilized other resources that may be available prior to considering a PEP? And this field is also a place to just talk about what is the plan? What are we going to be doing to help mitigate the current safety threat that's been identified? And go down, Marianne. So, and then the rest of this is pretty straightforward, but the bottom section will be filled out at the end and allows space for either the PEP is approved. Are we requesting a PCFT? Have we decided that is going to be requested in this case, when the start date of the PEP is going to be, when it will expire, and then that reassessment date. So that's standardly, we're anticipating checking in by day 10 to just see what is the status of the PEP. If the child's not home already by that point, we want to set up a kind of a staffing so that we have a plan for either extension or return home by 14 days. And those, that date that PEP will expire cannot be longer than the 14-day mark. Those are the boxes that will prompt the POCs to send the calendar invites so that you all have that on your calendar as a reminder to check in. And then if the PEP was denied, there's a little space for why it was denied and then what the next steps are. That does not need to be typed in, but that's just a prompt, a reminder that, you know, the social worker has assessed that there's a safety threat. And so if we're not moving forward with a PEP, what is the plan for that child so that social worker has some clear direction on what the next steps are. And then the social worker, supervisor, program manager, those can all be electronic. Worker codes and dates that can all be typed in. So questions on this form, and then we'll move to the extension form. Okay. And make it a little bigger. And this form again auto-populates just like the first one. The PEP start date. This is just so that it's an easy reference for during the staffing and the date that the PEP is currently set to expire. And just some basic information on that child's adjustment while being in the PEP. Go down, Marianne. And so then the next couple is just a spot for you all to give a little bit of information on since the PEP started, have there been any relatives or nephrons identified or engaged that might be a resource for this family, that can provide some support for this family? That can also be relatives or nephrons who were identified or engaged through FES. So that may not be by the social worker directly, but if you know that FES has reached out or is in the process of engaging anybody to try and be a support for part of that safety network for the family, entering that information there. If we haven't been able to identify or engage, what attempts have we made and the barriers that have been present in order for us to do that. And then go down more, Marianne. The next section is just information. Have we had a PCFT, yes or no? If yes, what was the outcome? If not, why did we assess that it didn't make sense? Go down a little more. And then these next two boxes need to be applicable. So we need to have some evidence that the circumstances that necessitated the PEP have not been resolved and it's still inappropriate, unsafe for that child to return home. And so what evidence do we have that leads us to that determination? And also that we feel like there's a high likelihood that although it's not safe today, within the next 7 calendar days, we feel like the situation is going to be resolved. And so what evidence, what information do we have that leads us to that determination? Can you go down, Marianne? And then again, just a quick summary. What have we already done? What have we already tried to connect the family with or utilize? And or what are our plans? Why do we feel like within the next 7 days, the safety threat will be mitigated and allow for the children to return home? And then that bottom section will be filled out during and at the end of the staffing. And again, it's just yes, either it was approved or it was denied. And you can see there's different blanks. So the extension is good for X amount of days. That cannot be more than the 14 days. But you all might assess you really only need the extension for another 5 days because there's a very solid plan. So it's really up to you during the staffing to determine how long the extension is going to be approved for. But again, just a prompt that it cannot exceed whatever date is that 28th day. And then again, maybe we haven't had a PCFT, but we feel like, yeah, you know, things aren't going quite the way we anticipated. We feel like it is going to be something that we want to utilize at this point. Just a prompt or a reminder for that. And same with FES. Maybe we didn't utilize FES, but we feel like maybe at this point things are leading us to think that request would be helpful. And then again, the signatures at the bottom are all electronic and the dates. So questions on that form? Okay. We will move on from those.
I do have a question.
Yes, Eugenia.
Okay, so when it's going from ER to IS, and let's say we're at the 11th hour, the 13th, 12th day, does the IS, and we of course need more time, can't put the child back in the home yet. At what point does it take over for the IS worker to step in and do this part? Or does there at least need to be a few days? How many days do we need to have as IS workers to see that, no, we can't place the child back tomorrow?
My thoughts on that are ideally if IS was literally just assigned and they don't really have a lot of history on the family, looping back with the ER worker, in my opinion, would be best practice, so that you make sure you have all the more brains, the better, especially those that have been working more closely with the family. So my hope would be that there's been some communication, and that IS is not expected to make a determination if they're just being assigned on day 13 and have yet to meet the family, have yet to really had a chance to make an assessment about what's going on. My hope would be that would kind of be a joint process. But I would say we don't have anything set in writing around that. So it's just kind of my initial thoughts. Does that answer your question, or do you have?
Well, I guess we just kind of don't know. So I guess it's going to be, I guess, case by case, or hopefully when it does the ER to IS staffing, that's looked at.
Yeah, definitely. I think if there is a PEP that is planned and we're doing the ER to IS staffing, that would be taken into consideration and some planning around. And again, that would depend on how long the PEP is already, if it's already been utilized or if it's just starting. But yeah, I think just on a case by case, trying to include the people in the staffing that have the information in order to make the best determination for the family and the child. And again, I'd love to, I'm going to be the planner that is the point of contact to help as we start this process. I'm kind of jumping ahead, but I think it makes sense. As we are utilizing this process and rolling this out, I would love to hear about how it's going, what's working, what are some challenges, what's not clear, so that we can work on ensuring that we have clarity and can make this as seamless as possible. So I love the questions, and I'm confident that we'll be able to work them out and figure it out as we move along.
And can I add also, that would be a great opportunity to use a PCFT to make sure that ER and IS are on the same page in regards to what the placement is looking like, include the family. That would be a great way to clarify. And since we will all know when it'll end, the PEP will end based on the POC sending us updates and calendar reminders, we'll be able to schedule that timely, is my hope.
Yeah, and I mean, it's bringing up some great things that I think we're going to probably have to figure out along the way. If we know that a case is moving from ER to IS in the middle of a PEP placement, we're probably going to want a way to ensure that those calendar reminders get on the IS workers calendar as well, and the IS supervisor. And so you have me thinking with that question now about how we're gonna make sure that everybody's aware, because that will be very important. Other questions?
May I add something? Sometimes it's not often, but it drives us nuts in IS because there's not always a very fast transition from ER to IS. Sometimes there's a bit of a delay for various reasons. And every once in a while, we'll get a case where it's at the total end of the PEP's placement and then it lands in IS's lap. So I just feel like if when a case is about to be transferred to IS and the ER worker already knows it's close to days of the expiration of the PEPs, that a decision be made in ER before it gets to IS so that it can ensure that the PEPs placement is not expired or day of or day before by the time it gets to IS.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's a great example of how it could work, so that you exactly what you said. I don't need to repeat it, but yes, I think there's nothing preventing an ER worker, if we're at day 9 or 10 and you know that you're transferring the case, there's absolutely the ability to staff at that point and request an extension, because more than likely the child's not going to be going home prior to the IS worker being assigned and going out and meeting with the family. So thank you for that idea. Other questions or comments? Okay, I think we can go back to our slides then, Marianne.
Okay.
What happens when a PEP ends? Okay, so a couple things. One, we've assessed that the safety threat has been mitigated, the situation has been stabilized, the child can return home. So after staffing a check-in with supervisor, program manager, you get approval, you send the child back home, complete the 1173, the PEP is done. Make sure to send that date and the outcome to your POC so that they know and they don't keep updating you that the PEP is still open or is expired. And or the situation hasn't, and this is again just in the first 14 days. If the situation has not stabilized, then like we've already been talking about, utilize the form, fill it out, have a staffing with your supervisor, program manager, request an extension. And if the extension is approved, just a reminder that a new consent for temporary placement of the child needs to be signed by the parents. And the parents should be getting a copy of that updated form with the new dates that the PEP is approved for. So I wanted to pause there. I know with COVID, are there any creative ways? I mean, I know often it's going out or meeting with the family, having the family come to the office to do the signatures. Are there any other ways that you all are utilizing to get signatures from families on forms?
Hey, this is Blanca. I believe my workers are still going to the homes and getting signatures in person.
Yeah, and I think most people are. I just also know with COVID, there's been some instances, and so I think that is absolutely best practice. However, that's why I wanted to at least pause. There are some, if you can come up with another way in order to get that signature, having it in writing. If for some reason you're doing a verbal conversation with the family, maybe the parents not local, and you are only able to have a phone conversation, maybe follow that up with a text, followed up with an email, something in writing so that you have documentation. You see a question coming in. Is there a way to get electronic signatures via email? Is there a way we can utilize that more? It's a great question. We don't have any formal programs like DocuSign that I'm aware of that we're formally using, Beverly. But I think in an example where a parent is not local, you're not able to meet with them in person, having that phone conversation and then signing on behalf of the parent on the form saying you spoke with them on X date, taking a picture of that and sending it through email or text to the parent so that you have that confirmation. You've sent that document to them. You've asked them to respond back, yes, I do approve. Things like that I've heard of being utilized thus far. That's not necessarily a formal, electronic signature app, but it's another way to utilize. Is that? I'd love to get DocuSign or another app like that. That would definitely be awesome. we can advocate for that. I don't know how easy that is to get, but yeah, I think as creative as we can be, while really keeping in mind having things in writing, ensuring that the parent understands what they're agreeing to, and having the written documentation for that. Marianne, were you going to say something?
Oh, I was thinking maybe it would work, and you tell me if this would work. If we email to a family or parents that are out of county, out of state or whatever, and then say they don't have the means to print out the form and sign it and fax it back, all that kind of stuff, could they just email, I've seen it, I agree, would a documentation via email work that we then print out and attach to the form?
Yeah, I've heard of that happening, not specifically with PEP paperwork, but with other forms. So I don't see why. Again, I think we utilize as best we can the in-person, the hard signatures, but then there's going to be those situations where it's just not feasible for whatever reason. So I think that, in my opinion, would suffice. Any other questions? Okay. So then the other alternative is either the extension doesn't make sense to extend, or we've gotten to close to the end of our 28 days, and it's still for unfortunately it's just not safe, and the child's not able to return home. So prior to the 28-day mark, have that staffing with your supervisor, program manager, and determine what the most appropriate next steps are. Two options you'll see there, either it potentially filing, going to court, maybe informal supervision, utilizing a voluntary placement, which can be a little bit longer, up to 6 months. So just making sure that you have that plan identified prior to that 28-day mark, and that the paperwork is completed to close the PEP prior to that date. And just a quick note, because I don't know if everybody's aware, but if for some reason we are not diligent and we do not close the PEP prior to that 28-day mark, that funding ceases to be from foster care funding and starts coming out of all county funds. So it's not just that we didn't sign a form, but there are some fiscal consequences that come when we don't close out PEPs timely. So, okay, next slide, Marianne. I think we're almost done. Okay, so we're just going to do a quick glance at the PNP. It's uploaded into Policy Tech, and then just looking or showing you all the communications of data and communication guide, so that you all can just see that really quick. It'll be great resources in the future. Feel free to pull those up, Marianne. And then while she's doing that, just a quick infomercial. The PEP policy and procedure is currently, so this training is really to highlight some of the process changes, the new forms, how we're tracking data, the things that we just went over. There's a larger policy revision coming out, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's going to be touching more on the things that are still going to be implemented. So the Indian child, I don't remember all the different things. I know we're going to add some more detail in some of the sections to give a little bit more clarity on certain things, but that is in process. And once that is finalized, there will be another training to go over that P&P and the more detailed revisions. Okay, I see Marianne. So Marianne's typed in protective emergency placements, the policy and procedure pops up. Is it opening?
Can you see that?
Not yet. You may need to stop sharing and click on the P&P. There we go. Okay, so just a couple things. This was just updated, and really the majority of this is the same as it was before. Marianne, if you want to just go down to the couple sections, so it gives you the definitions. This is all the same. All the criteria, you'll see that the criteria, going back up. Okay, yeah, so keep going down. So that criteria, that mirrors what you saw on the forms. So it just helps us ensure that all those were met. Keep going down. All this is the same as it was before, no changes. Again, no changes here. Just wanted to highlight that bottom bullet. Just remember, when you are anticipating, you know that you're likely going to be requesting a PEP, send a heads up to CPSU so that they can start working on locating a placement, so that when you do have approval for the PEP, that child has a place to go and isn't needing to be transported to CPSU. So as much as we can plan ahead, they very much appreciate, and I think you all are really great at that. But just a reminder for folks that aren't as familiar with utilizing PEP, just make sure to loop in CPSU to partner with them to ensure that you can have a placement identified. And then keep going down. So this section right here, I just also want to point out our expectation is that when you utilize the PEP, starting with the day that the child is initially removed, there should be an assessment at least every 7 days. And more than likely, you might be in contact with that family even more often than every 7 days. But checking in with the family and then just keeping your supervisor and PM updated with the progress of the family, how things are going, at least once a week. We're not, so that's different than the formal staffing. So there are formal staffings, that's what these forms are considered. There is no process to have a formal, written documentation and forms filled out every 7 days, but there is the expectation that there should be a level of assessment done at least weekly. And then the ones that we already reviewed, the initial and then at the 14-day are the ones that have the forms tied to them. So just wanted to clarify that. Keep going down. Oh, the rule. So each protective emergency placement case shall be staffed. And I don't think this is new. I think this was in the prior PEP, but just wanted to highlight it as well. shall be staffed and approved by the supervisor and program manager prior to initiating, extending, or terminating. So even at the point, you're not going to fill out a form to terminate, but still check in with your supervisor and PM, make sure you guys are all on the same page about terminating or closing a placement as well. And then go down, Marianne. So the charts or the tables really just kind of outline the different things. So if these 4 things apply, go ahead and initiate a PEP. And it really just kind of mirrors what we've already gone over, that the criteria is met, the parents are cooperative, they agree, because again, this is voluntary, and that you've staffed and it's been approved. Go down a little more. And this is where it's an easy reference for which form to use, who and how the form will be filled out. So if all of that applies, go ahead and initiate the PEP for no more than 14 days. Go down more. And then this next section really just tries to explain the prior to the 14-day mark, but no later than, what to do. So if you feel like the extension makes sense, fill out the form, staff, and then that next side gives a little bit more clarity on just what to do, extending, kind of just a reference for what we've already talked about. Go down. And then the next one is for if it doesn't make sense for the child to go back home, there's still safety concerns that cannot be mitigated, what the options are. And then go down from there. I think it's just the reference forms at this point. It's not letting you click it, huh? There it goes. So this is just a quick reference for the different forms that apply and that need to be filled out. When CPSU finds the placement, they also help with some of these forms. So just make sure you stay in communication with them so that you guys are on the same page about which forms they're doing. And I think that's it. Do you want to also open up that related document? So this, can you guys hear me? It's telling me my internet connection is unstable, but I'm trusting that you can hear me, hopefully.
I could hear you. This is Tom.
Okay, thank you.
I can hear you too.
Okay, perfect. So this,
Oh,
say that again?
oh, Christy, this is Tom.
Yeah.
So we have a comment in the chat. Remember to notify your FSW of placement change by revising your FSW referral.
Okay. By revising your
For visitation, you mean?
I'm just reading the comment in the chat. So if we do a placement change, yeah, how would that impact the FSW's role in the process? That's what I think the question, you know, how we can preface it.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
That makes sense. If there's something that the FSW needs to do, then we keep it.
Then update them so that they have that.
Last part,
I'm just
Marianne.
thinking visitation, like if the FSWs. Yes, like if there's visitation happening during the PEP because the kids aren't in the home and maybe we need a supervised visit or we need a FSW to help with transport, that kind of thing, then keep them in the loop. That's what I'm guessing, but whoever wrote the question, maybe they could clarify.
Marianne, this is Nikki, Family Service Supervisor. And oftentimes when those PEP placements change, the FSW doesn't get the message and it's not communicated. So we're kind of scrambling and there can be a lapse in visitation when CPSU secures a different placement. Yes.
That makes sense. Okay, so when there's an FSW actively working, that makes sense. Thank you, Nikki. Okay, so Marianne's going to show
Thanks, Nikki. Can you see it? I have it up, but maybe I need to go out and come in
No,
again.
you got to unshare and share again. It doesn't automatically. Zoom is different than some of the other platforms. So you have to specifically choose what you want to share.
Let me know if you can see that.
It's coming. There it is. Okay. So I just wanted to highlight, this is also accessible. It's a resource attachment. Cool. There's a little bit of a delay. So this just gives detail to the process that we've basically gone through in this training. If you want to go down, Marianne, so this references the forms, when they should be used, the who should do what. And these charts or this table was what you guys saw in the slides. So rather than referencing your PowerPoint, you also have access to this. If there's any changes made to this in the future, obviously Policy Tech would have the most current version. So I want to point this out and encourage you all to use the Policy Tech version versus the PowerPoint. Keep going down. This is all what you guys saw in the slides. And then if you're curious, the rest of the document really highlights what the POCs are tracking and ties it into the Excel spreadsheet. And then the different duties that they'll be doing. It also goes into what they'll be including in the calendar invites for you all. So the rest of this really pertains more to what they're going to be doing and how it assists you all in your daily practice. But just wanted to make sure you were aware of this form. So with that, I think that concludes our presentation. Marianne will show the last slide, but we have today's training, and then the second training for those that weren't able to make it today is on December 10. And then we know with the holidays, there's a lot of things going on, people out of the office. So we are looking to formally implement this process, the utilization of these forms, the tracking log, as of January 1. And we will send a reminder out as well when we get there toward the end of December to remind everybody January 1, we'll start this process. And with that, are there any final comments or questions?
Hi, this is Tom again. I just want to remind our audience, if you haven't already checked in via the chat, please do so. Just let us know your name so that we can ensure that you'll get credit for completing the training.
Yes, thank you, Tom. I just want to thank everybody for your participation today. And if you think of questions after today, feel free to reach out, send me an email, give me a call. And we hope you find this helpful. I'd love to hear how the process goes as you guys implement. And with that, I wish you a good rest of your day if there's no other questions. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.